Okay, it's 3 after. That means we can get started. So Ben's letting the people who are still trickling in into the meeting, but we've got a great showing so far. People are really interested in this topic. And when Katie and her team presented at the Texas Conference for Digital Libraries last spring, we were fascinated with what they were doing and their approaches, and we thought other people would be too. So we asked if they would be interested in coming and doing a webinar for us, because we do these about once a month, and lots of people want to know, what are we doing with AI? How's it working? Does it work, right? And which scenarios does it work on? So I'm gonna introduce Katie, and then she's gonna introduce the rest of the team that's presenting with her, or they're gonna introduce themselves. So Katie Pierce Meyer is...
she's at the University of Texas
Austin
School of Architecture,
Right.
the Architecture Libraries.
So, yes, take it away, Katie.
And you'll need to unmute yourself.
All right, can everyone see my screen with the title slide? Okay, great. Got a lot of screens open, so I want to make sure I'm sharing the right one and you're not seeing my crazy notes. So, hello everyone. Thank you for attending the presentation, assessing large language models, architectural archive, metadata, and transcription. This presentation is going to highlight work we have done, and some of which that is still underway, to test using large language models to generate metadata for a collection of digitized architectural publications. 4 out of 6 of our project team will be presenting today. And to start us off, I will introduce myself. I'm Katie Pierce Meyer, Head of Architectural Collections at UT Libraries. Our team also includes Willem Borkgren, who cannot be here with us today, but was instrumental in the project development and analysis, and Josh Conrad, who brought us his subject expertise to reviewing output, and he's actually putting much of what we have learned about this project, or through this project, into practice. I'll also hand it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves, I think starting maybe with Devon.
Hello, I'm Devon Murphy. I am the metadata analyst in the Department of Digital Stewardship at UT Austin. And for this project, I brought, unsurprisingly, metadata expertise. And I'll pass it to Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Moutran. I'm Hannah Moutran. I work in research and strategy at UT Libraries on AI implementation projects like this one. I'm going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about the design of the workflow and how it was guided by what we learned in our research.
Hi, I'm Karina Sánchez. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian at UT Austin. And what I brought into this project was my digital scholarship expertise, and learning a lot about AI through this process was great.
All right, so to keep us going, I'm going to start by introducing the test collection that we used, and then Devon will describe the project structure and testing methodology we developed to review large language models used on these materials. From there, Karina is going to present on our testing results and analysis with some items to consider for implementation, and Hannah is going to conclude with the workflow and recommendations for using these tools for metadata work. And then hand it back to me, I think, to talk a little bit at the end about what we might do as future steps, or what we already kind of are undergoing and starting to do. So beginning with that, I will go ahead and move us on to talk about Southern Architect and Building News, which I'll refer to as SABN. I think some people might call it SABN. We've got a lot of shorthand for this particular collection, but it's been a really wonderful one to use for this work, I think. Our collection actually consists of 3 separate titles, along with some others we don't have, that merged to become Southern Architect and Building News, which is a historical architecture trade publication that documented professionalization of the field and construction activities across the South. A full run of the publication does not exist, but we hold the largest collection of extant copies at the Chase Architecture and Planning Library in our special collections. So it is an illustrated monthly trade publication, and with the main audience being architects and other industry professionals like contractors and vendors in the American South. So many issues will focus on new building projects across the South. There's opinion pieces, many ads, really interesting ads from vendors, seen on the far right, where you have 2 ads for storefront awnings and fuse boxes. The issues range from 1889 to 1932. Our particular test set was containing pages from 1920 to 1931. So out of those 254 Sabin issues that we hold, we selected 14 different pages from 5 different issues for varying page type. There's a lot of content within this, a lot of text, a lot of images, a lot of ads, a lot of different typefaces. And so there's a lot of potential for seeing what we can accomplish and not. Very little of this journal has been indexed, and what metadata does exist for the collection is pretty limited at best. We have issue level metadata published in our collections portal, so we were thinking about ways to enrich that with some additional description. It's not particularly discoverable via databases like the Avery indexed architectural periodicals, but UT Libraries has fully digitized and made all the issues that we hold available with very basic issue level metadata, but lacking that robust description. So architects and buildings that are mentioned in this journal are also potentially represented in our collections at the Alexander Architectural Archives. So one of the additional things we were hoping to do perhaps is make connections between material in this journal and content that we hold in the archives. We've also been collaborating pretty heavily with a faculty member in the School of Architecture at UT to further explore and index this publication. And he's working with some students to identify people, organization, themes, and places to potentially produce an interface and other data sets for further engagement with the text. So page level images and OCR text files that were previously created prior to this project have been uploaded to the UT Libraries instance of From the Page for that faculty member's continued research with the journal. So in light of its usage by researchers and to support further discovery, we chose this as a great collection to use as a test to evaluate large language models being a possible tool for generating more robust description. And I will hand it off to Devon.
Thank you. So yeah, our question was, how can we evaluate when there are so many models out there, and how can we have results that are meaningful in relation to our metadata workflows and materials? So, slide please. We decided to focus on the full metadata workflow for our testing. So that includes OCR generation, or optical character recognition, summarization, which we called table of contents in this presentation, named entity extraction, and subject heading assignment, so generating specifically Library of Congress subheadings, or LCSH. I will say that we did have an awareness beforehand that the exact creation of valid LCSH terms would be unlikely, but we still found it worthwhile to test results to inform our next steps with subject assignment. And while we use architecture materials in this test, the metadata work tasks that we chose are the same across all collections at UT Libraries, so that the results could be generalized. To balance out bias in evaluation, we conducted blind scoring without model names on our outputs, and we chose a variety of team members from across the libraries with diverse expertise and also diverse expertise with LLMs. So some of us with lots of expertise with them, and some of us with very little. So we developed a coding scheme to analyze scores given by team members on the LM results. These evaluation categories are completeness, accuracy, and usefulness. Completeness being, does the output metadata fully describe the content? Does accuracy defined as the metadata output correct? Are the short summaries and their descriptive elements reasonably correct? And then usefulness being described as whether the metadata would help a searcher find the materials better. To measure these categories, we developed a scoring rubric ranging from 1 to 4. These values were applied to LM output from each task, with 1 being the lowest score for responses and 4 being the highest. Blank or incomplete responses returned by models were given a 0 value. We scored by literally looking at the output, the text, and comparing it to both like old metadata that was created for these materials, the resources themselves, and examples of human-created metadata in our collections portal to be able to make that comparison. A lot of us create or have created metadata, so the expertise helped. And we also conducted monthly meetings to discuss our results and check on our coding scheme and how we were scoring. Sentiment analysis conducted by Willem and our team also helped here too, in ensuring that we were still consistently following patterns in our testing. In turn, we also determined a standard for writing prompts using the framework devised by Hartman-Caverly. Prompts consistently contain the following components as listed on the slide in bullet points. So persona information, requirements, organization, medium, purpose, and tone. An example of what these mean is requirements that the model does not alter content or names, but do fix punctuation errors that we find. After outputs, the prompts were reviewed and improved successively, as well as specializing some for differently formatted pages. So a page with only a single image and a short caption versus a full text page with dual columns. Technical expertise and financial resources can influence LLM workflow choice. And so in order to understand the full spectrum of how LLMs could be useful in archival metadata creation, we tested 2 implementation models using both text and image inputs. So we have both API as an implementation model and web as an implementation model. We chose also 7 LLMs that are widely available in the US. This is technically 8, but Copilot only worked for 1 testing round, so not truly a viable category to compare to. And again, we chose these widely available models to make the results generalizable.
Okay, so now let's talk about results and analysis. Next slide. So these are the findings and analysis for the tasks and how the API and web models treated images and text inputs. So for example, LLM generated OCR text. The OCR text was great and worked better than other tools like DocWorks or other similar tools. We saw a great OCR output specifically from Claude Sonnet 3.5 for the table of content summaries. Most of the LMs did good with table of content summaries, so we didn't notice any major issues. For name entities, most of the APIs and web tests scored low, but testers found the information to be useful to help pinpoint people, events, and locations mentioned throughout the documents. We didn't have a list of these entities before, so having a list now, even if it's not perfect, is still preferable. For subject headings, most of the APIs and webs testing scored low. The subject headings created by the LMs were just not helpful metadata. The headings were typically really broad or didn't align with any of the standards by the Library of Congress subject headings that we were looking at. So API overall performed better than web testing. So both API and web provided low scores in similar areas, but with API being a bit more accurate. Large models typically provided better scores since they have more training and can conduct a larger number of tasks, but small models can have their benefits since they can focus and be trained on very specific tasks, and they're also cost-effective compared to large models. So when inputting things in the models, we thought carefully about what prompts we wanted to add. We discussed and redesigned prompts multiple times until we had the results that we thought were good enough based on our diverse expertise. So it's important to keep working and retesting these prompts until you have something that works best for you. But even with the reworking, our results are not going to be perfect. So that's why this assessment is really important. Next slide. I think I'll pass on to Devon.
Yes, that's right. So analyzing a little bit deeper into the pages, we found that some results that we got were related to the material aspects of the issues. This was something that I personally was really interested in, having an art historical background. So seeing at the literal way that pages are arranged or their content affecting a result is really interesting to me. Some examples include cover pages having consistently lower scores in named entity and table of content summarization tasks, possibly because of limited text content to analyze, while anthropic image models compress their files, which may account for some of the image input scores being lower than their text input scores, even though they're processing the same tasks and the same pages. Some other examples listed on the slide here include pages with multi-column layouts or overlaid mix of images and text, like the ad on the right for these train engine boiler type things. They had higher OCR scores than the original OCR text, so that's like an improvement. And then also OCR generation for text heavy pages also received lower scores, with the exception of Claude 3.5. So again, models having a variety of responses to different kinds of pages.
Okay, so let's talk about other implementations. So overall, no single model is perfect at every task for every kind of issue, though a few tasks outpace existing tools like OER and NER. So assessing these needs and wants for an AI is important. Looking and figuring out which tasks you want to prioritize and what resources you have will help you determine what best tool to choose. You might also mix and match tools if you can do so. You also need to consider that changes with new versions being released can improve or even worsen certain tasks. So how do we choose the right tool for our usage? Instead of crowning one model as the best, it's a more practical to consider your own limitations. Three major ones are cost, time, and format. So if money is concerned, you might want a larger model since they are costly and are not better suited are better suited for all tasks. You might not want image processing since it minimally increases costs. For time, it's important that you think about what's going to take you longer to work with. For example, the web requires asynchronous human involvement and wait time, but you're still gathering as you're getting real-time processing. If you're using API batches, that can take a longer time to process, but it is predictable since you will get your results in 24 hours. This all really depends on how many items you are working on and how closely you want to work with these items. So for format, it's important to think about, do you want to use OpenAI or Anthropic models? Since these models each work best with certain formats. OpenAI, we notice, work best with image input, while Anthropic models work best with text files. If OCR is an important part of your work, you might want to input images if you are working specifically with a lot of illustration and columns, but if your document is text heavy, then text input is preferred. Overall, you want to consider, do you want to use a free or cheaper version of LMs, which will be web chatbots? You might lose some quality based on the tasks. Do you want to consider smarter models like GPT-4o Mini, which are cheaper and can batch process, which is time efficient? Next slide. You might also need to consider if your collection has harmful content, something our collection frequently contains. In the middle of our workflow testing, we started to notice that offensive and/or harmful language was removed or replaced by some models. Therefore, it became important for us to consider and score how content is processed by large language models. For example, one of the issue pages we tested contains an ad using a slur for Black people. When processed for OCR tasks, models varied in response. Only one GPT-4o transcribed but did not repeat or omit the term. Other tools decided not to process the page with harmful language, use the harmful language in the metadata field, or replace the term with the machine replace the term with what the machine thought was less offensive. So it's important to have a balance. You want the AI tool to OCR the harmful language since you want to properly transcribe the models or transcribe the material, but you want the language to influence, but you don't want the language to influence the rest of the tasks that you're doing. Therefore, human intervention and review is still needed and very important. If anything, these tools are at least a way to flag these terms that humans can easily miss. We can never fully put our trust on LMs. So they're a tool to help, but not a tool to fully depend on as we're developing this metadata. So metadata is sensitive. It's impactful on communities that are being represented. Therefore, having an ethical and diverse lens is important when using language models to develop terms or even developing AI metadata workflow like we did. As demonstrated, human intervention and review are always needed, especially in this case. Next slide. So now let's talk about privacy. So privacy is another major consideration to evaluate when deciding upon LM usage. While using LM APIs generally provide more privacy than using a web browser, in the case of harmful content, these prompts and images can be tracked, potentially posing other problems for archival usage. Using an LM with a web browser offers little guarantee of privacy and a high likelihood of usage being sent back to the LM to train it. Doing so is inappropriate for harmful sensitive content or collections that represent a large corpus of individuals' work. All of these are important factors to consider when choosing LM. Therefore, if your collection is delicate to a community under copyright or has any private data, then you might need to think critically before using any type of LM you will use, and if necessarily, only use it for certain collections. Next slide. You're muted, Hannah.
Next slide. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk about recommendations and our workflow. Next slide. Yeah, okay. Best practices. So these are things that we learned over the course of the project for capacity building. Providing opportunities for staff at libraries and archives to develop expertise and to experiment in a low stakes environment. This project is a good example of that. One of the main goals that we had is just to explore and learn more about how to effectively use AI tools, when and how to use them conscientiously, et cetera. And then alongside that, it's also important to develop or invest in the technical infrastructure that will let non-technical staff benefit and experiment as well. For model selection, and we have talked a lot about different models and what's better at this and what's better at that. And the fact is that new models are released all the time. They may or may not be better for your project. They may be cheaper, or maybe you want to use one for a specific part. And I think the important thing is just to be able to really quickly evaluate them. Systematically. So you need a evaluation criteria that are consistent, and you need a small ground truth data set so that you can at least quickly see which one, if this is something that's viable for more testing or for usage. And then, and we've talked about this, but choosing models that fit specific tasks. For us, Haiku was really good at summarization, and that's a smaller model, so it's much cheaper, but performs just as well as the larger models for that specific task. For the workflow design, kind of in general, I think working with subject area experts and also with people who, are on kind of different sides of where the data is going to go and how it might be used is really useful when you're sketching out the initial workflow. And then I think for, out of the box solutions, may work, but I think the best results are going to come from adapting them to your specific collection, and testing and changing the prompts and changing the strategies and adjusting as you go along. So I feel like we have talked about it a little bit, but I feel like I should mention some limitations. So projects like this do need to be tended because they are, there's so much change over time. It's also possible to run into data overload, which Katie is going to talk about a little bit, but just essentially having so much information in the same space to put it in is a lot. And then sometimes, it uses a lot of resources to do this kind of work. So sometimes it's better to just use old-fashioned programming instead of LLMs. So this is a long slide. Sorry, Katie. Yeah, so this one's going to be my longest slide, so bear with me. So step one, in our workflow, the LLM processes the inputs, and it could be in our workflow, it's text files or images, and produces metadata in a JSON structure. It includes OCR text, entities, topics, geographic entities, summaries, and content warnings. We don't ask for controlled vocabulary terms. That's very specifically to prevent hallucinations. We do give really specific instructions on how to structure data. Geographic entities should be written city -- state, for example. And for our workflow, we use OpenAI models. That is because we have them available to us. And we also have options for real-time and batch processing. For step two, so that's, we send the information, the initial information, and then we get back, our starter metadata. And so for step 2, we use the topics that were generated in the first step to query library databases. We have a max of 8 per page, and then we use those to query 3 vocabulary APIs, LCSH, FAST, and Getty AAT. For each query, we can get up to 3 terms with their URIs. That limit is deliberate because it's too many otherwise. And then we also generate fast geographic and LCSH chronological terms as well. So for step 3, we are giving the LLM a chance to use the terms that were returned in step 2. So we send the LLM a short summary of each page, a visual description if it was an image page, and the verified topic-specific vocabulary terms. And then we ask it which of the terms best describes that page. And we also give a lot of collection-specific context and guidelines for how to choose. And then it chooses. And in that step, we're creating the page-level metadata files. In step 4, we're creating issue-level metadata. We give the large language model, again, separately, a short summary and subject headings for each page in an issue. And then we ask it to pick out of all of the subject headings, the 10 most appropriate for the issue as a whole, and to generate a 4 to 5 sentence paragraph summarizing the issue as a whole. And then step 5, our final step is doesn't involve an LLM, and it's just taking the entities that were pulled out in the first step and fuzzy matching them so that we group them into things that are probably representative of the same person or thing, counting how many times they show up in the collection. We have the type, so they're organized according to that. And then for each entity, we're tracking the number of times it appeared, the time period, and the issue and page where the instance occurred. Next page. Next slide. So this is what our page level metadata files look like. So this is in step 3 again, this is produced, and it includes the page and issue number, the full text transcription, the visual description, if it's there, content summary, the topics, the named entities, geographic entities, the selected subject heading. So it's basically everything for a specific page. Next slide. Oh, the issue content index. So for the issue content index, it's intended to be a sort of navigation tool. So it's 1 file per issue, and it gives like a quick overview of the contents of the page with just the description instead of having also the transcription, the topics, named entities, and selected subject headings. So this is nothing new. This is just another artifact that we're creating from the same information. Next slide. Issue metadata. So in step 4, we're asking for the issue level description. So we, we're pretty specific about what we're looking for. We do give some context, and we also ask for, to emphasize certain things like more historically important or architecturally important information. And then we also request the top 10 subject headings. So this is a pretty small project for an LLM. It's not that much total to do because it's just for 1 issue, each message. So, but it is new content. Okay, entity authority report. Next slide. So this is collection wide. So the names can be inconsistent. So like, it could be, Kratzer Company in one, and then it's Kratzer Co., and then it's, W. Kratzer Company or something like that. So those are all the same firm. So we're trying to fuzzy match those together. And then the entity types were already established in step 1 because we ask for those from the LLM. So that's how we organize things in step 5. We do give options, but we're not super adamant that it only be those options, just to give the flexibility. Next slide. So the vocabulary mapping report. This shows the control vocabulary tool use. For each page, we see the topics that the LLM generated and what that topic as a query returned from the control vocabulary APIs. And then you also see what the LLM selected in step 3. So like as an example, here you can see that for, the topic elevator, there are different rules. Like for the topic elevators, fast returned elevators, Getty AAT returned automatic elevators, and the LLM chose the fast term, likely because it was more general. We do also have a log of kind of the responses that includes reasoning so that you can go back and try to like use that reasoning to then change the way that you've written the prompt if it's not doing what you want it to do. Yeah, and then, if the LLM chooses terms that are basically equivalent, we automatically deduplicate those. And then we also do a check to make sure that just in case the LLM has like somehow created a term that actually isn't there, we don't include that in the artifacts and in the workflow JSON. So before we move on, I just want to say that all the code is on GitHub, and it includes, the whole implementation and documentation. And I think that, it could definitely be adapted to work for other collections with that basic of like extraction, lookup, selection, synthesis, artifact creation. So, Katie.
All right, so where does that leave us with? Well, we've generated a lot of metadata and we've definitely generated a lot of content. Part of the challenge we're dealing with now, I think, is that some of our current systems aren't necessarily able to contain all of the things that we've done. So while we've been undergoing this project, we've also had some of our technical infrastructure at UT Libraries has been changing as well. So hopefully we'll be working towards being able to do two things. One is being selective about what kind of things we're actually going to use. Like, what do we actually need to use LLMs to generate? If it's more than we're able to do anything with, that's a good indication that maybe we, pick different tasks and prioritize certain things. So I think one takeaway I have is that, okay, we've figured out what it can do and what it could do well. We also have some priorities. So from my perspective as the sort of collection manager for this content and the specialist, I guess, in terms of what kind of researchers would be looking for, I think generating better OCR could be really helpful. That is page level. We would use that to replace the OCR that's currently in our digital asset management system. I also am really interested in the named entity extraction piece of it. That is probably the number one thing I see the benefit of being able to do that and add that to or from the page instance with that faculty member's robust research that's happening. I also have been doing things like creating Wikidata entries for named entities, people, firm, buildings that don't have authority records out there. So this is one that I love that we're checking against authority records, and where they don't exist, that's something that we have been already in the habit of doing for people who are represented in our collection. So creating an authoritative name for those entities and deduping them is the first step in being able to come up with a good name for those things. So that's great. Basically, in terms of making decisions about selecting subsections of each journal issue, we've picked certain pages that are going to give us, the best content. And one of the things that I was mentioning earlier, Josh Conrad is already doing, I think, is looking at some of those specific pages, like the building and construction news. And this particular image on the right is of one of those pages that really just lists buildings as they're being created and gives a lot of really robust, helpful content about the location, the name, owners sometimes, architects, all the kind of things that we would want to do to create authoritative records for particular buildings that might be of interest to people. So we definitely want to be also continuing to build on the work we've figured out about harmful content, and also making our systems able to do things like generate or acknowledge that some of this AI was AI generated metadata. So things like that are sort of a future of where we want to take, I think, this work. But for now, I think that that is what we wanted to cover. And I think we should just open it up for questions unless any of my other presenters have other things to add at the end.
So we'll take questions in the chat, or you can kind of raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll kind of call on people as it comes in. I have some questions because this is fascinating, so interesting. Remind me, you said this at the beginning, but how many pages did you work with this test?
I think we said 14. Was that correct?
Okay, that's what I heard. Okay.
Yeah, so it was actually not a tremendous number of pages, given the full count of pages is, oh, I had that at one point, I think over 20,000. It's 254 issues, ranging in size from usually 40 pages to 100 pages. So if we were to run it on the full corpus, it would be very substantial. And the output from that of like page level metadata is definitely more than we would be able to do something within our current systems to make it available. So
True. So
Yeah.
I think
We have actually, I will just add that we have actually tested with full issues though.
yes.
I think we've tested with 4 full issues, just to see, but we haven't done the full like workup that we did with the original pages. So we have not gone through like with a fine tooth comb to make sure that everything, you know, oh, did it miss this like comma or did it like spell this differently than it was back then?
Yeah, and that's some of the next, like the work underway, I think, is to probably do more of the analysis of that output based on those full issues, because I definitely think that that is a way to go. And metadata at the issue level is what we're currently storing and could absolutely add to and make that more well represented for sure. But the first question that I actually saw was how long did it take to do the, where is it?
Verify the accuracy of a full page of text.
That was, and I should say, it was such a pleasure to work with the other 5 team members on this, because we had a variety of perspectives. We have people with different expertise, but we really were great at coming together and talking through how we were judging things, and it was very time consuming. So I will say that the human is very much embedded in this work. Absolutely at every level, and especially in the design and the decisions around what you're going to choose and how you're going to do it and how you're writing prompts. But the verification or the assessment of the work is so critical, I think. And it really was helpful to have a group of people who are not only assessing it, but then reflecting on their own assessment and like helping us like guide further work. And I will say there's another project at UT Libraries that's testing another sort of opportunity around AI for metadata use, and they're using the same assessment tool that we created for this project. So it's already, I think, having really good, effect at hopefully helping others be as critical.
Well, I think that is so impressive, because we've had other people come talk about some of their projects and they spot check, and we're like, So
Yeah. And it's tough because I think in the long run, my hope is that we'll be able to do some really rich testing right now so that we can begin to build more trust of or understanding of how to implement these things in a way that doesn't always require that level of assessment, because then it's not
saving time.
It's not saving any time, right? It might be more complicated, and that may not be the worst thing, but we definitely need to figure out how to make it something that can be implementable in a reasonable way. We won't always, I think, have the capacity to have 6 people dedicated to spending hours and hours, because it was hours and hours of assessment time.
Okay, some more questions. I'm gonna skip number 1 because it looks like that got answered, but number 2 here from, I can't read who
Kelly
the,
Babcock.
Kelly Babcock. How did you create the ground truth data set for testing? Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah, and do you have a sense of the amount of time it took to do that?
So I think I can answer that. That's actually like one of the things that we learned over the course of this project was that that would be good. I'm doing that. I've done that for another project. That maybe it seemed more obvious for, where it was just like supposed to come up with an OCLC number. So it was easy to kind of work my way through all the possible OCLC numbers for each item that it could be, you know. But for this one, we were doing it, you know, really by hand, and there was a lot of it's sort of interpretation in a way, because I think, you know, we were really, I mean, and maybe Devon and Katie can talk more about like kind of why it matters that we were all kind of like weighing in on what was like good, especially for like summaries and for entity extraction. But if I could go back and restart this, and for people who are starting their projects now, I would definitely say take the time at the beginning, if you're doing OCR, for example, to like really create perfect OCR that you can then just like run a test against and just do similarity, right?
Yeah, I would agree because our original like OCR set was OCR created, I think, by DocWorks years and years and years ago. So it was pretty low quality. Maybe not the best set to compare to. And then the original metadata was also quite minimal. That we also had a comparison set for all pages. I mean, not bad because like there are like we make choices sometimes in metadata creation to have consistent values. So for example, the repository is always the same, the publisher is always the same. Sometimes we apply the same subject term, which can be helpful for browsing subject facets on a website. But yeah, we like our initial like testing categories we determined before doing the project, but I think it would have also, or maybe this is just part of testing, I guess. And it was helpful to have our very, very consistent meetings to continually discuss this and build onto those categories. Each each like task would have slightly varying meanings as to what was complete or useful or accurate. So, for example, for like subjects and entities, you wanted to like have a complete telling of what was presented on the page, which not always the most necessary for description because we don't need a mile-long description of what's going on the page, just like the highlights of what's going on there. So yeah, it varies, I guess.
Okay, we've got another interesting question from Ella Thompson. She's curious about the process for asking the LLM to provide possible candidates for authority records. Do you give it access to the scope notes for AAT, LCSH, fast records, etc., or is it only basing its decision by the term itself?
Maybe the question could also just be, how are you generating these these possible authority record references?
Well, we take the topics that were generated in step one and we use those as the query terms. And then when we get back, so we have limited it a little bit because for each page we were allowing for 8 topics. And then we were querying 3 vocabularies for those terms, right? And then we limited it to 3 that we would get back from the APIs for each query. But if you take all of that together, it doesn't sound like much, but it's actually 72 terms. So that's a lot, but we did send all of that. Whatever came back, it wasn't always, nearly that much because sometimes, and this is the thing with really specific topics, like sometimes there will be no results for that from the vocabularies, even though we're querying 3. So,
And those
so
queries are not LLM queries, they're direct to vocabulary APIs.
exactly, yes. So, and then we get those back and we send like a summary so we do another conversation with the LLM in step 3, where we send the summary for a specific page, and then the terms and the visual description if it's an image that, so we had a visual description. And we also send like a bunch of context. There's a prompt with a bunch of context because you have to think like the only thing, it's one conversation for the LLM, right? So the only thing it has is that summary and the terms, all the like 50 terms or whatever. And so you have to give the context of like, what is this collection about? What is the time period? How is it supposed to choose it? What should it prioritize, etc. I hope that answers.
So there's a really lively conversation in the chat. I love that the analysts are responding to people's questions. I'm going to skip ahead to a question that none of you have jumped on yet to answer. So Bruce Hedrick asks, was there any reflection done at the beginning of the process to consider what metadata is the most important to drive broad discovery with today's changing research and discovery tools? You all were capturing an immense amount of impressive metadata, I agree with that, and I wonder how much of that is or could be used effectively by the discovery methods used by students and other researchers these days.
And I was about to try to respond to that via writing, but I'll just go ahead and ramble and see if I can come to some effective things. Yes, Bruce, there was a lot of thought put into it. We did generate a tremendous amount of stuff, but that's, and I will say at the beginning, I knew the things I was most interested in, and being the sort of collection, contributor to this project, and the subject expert, or one of the subject experts, I am thinking about what people would want to use as access points to the collection, and how do we generate things that we could actually apply in ways that will make it useful for discovery. And I did that at the beginning, but I also didn't want to be limited by my preconceptions of how people find things, because I think that is also changing. And like I said, our technical infrastructure at UT Libraries just is generally kind of evolving over time as well, with the implementation of some new tools and changing interfaces that we're creating. And so I wanted to see what it could do, and that might open up opportunities to think about things that we haven't thought about before, but also then be mindful about, since we were doing this with like a really small subset of the collection, I didn't feel like it was wasteful. If we were to run this across the entire corpus, I think that would be probably wasteful because we wouldn't be able to do anything meaningful with all of that metadata. In the end, I think kind of what I was saying earlier is what's, to me, seems like the most critical, which is the identification of accurately pulling out names of people, places, buildings, firms, things like that. Identification of buildings. And sometimes this is actually a really great way to do that, because often in this publication, it has captions that tells you what building it is, as opposed to if we're doing this on architectural photography, which is another great interest of mine, where often the name of a building isn't present. And we've tried doing that, and it's a little trickier because a lot of the LLMs I've had any opportunity to work with will misidentify a building. And honestly, my biggest problem with any of these tools so far is not when it doesn't know and tells you it doesn't know. It's when it tells you, like seemingly authoritatively, that this is a building and it's not the right building, or identifies the name of an architect or a firm incorrectly. And so I see that happening a lot. So those are the things I would say. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully it does. Like thinking of ways to create those kinds of named entities are just right now my biggest priority. And then probably description at an issue level is very helpful, because we have very limited description, and a lot of that kind of named entities can also appear in descriptions in ways that can help people navigate to content that they're looking for. So those would be the things I prioritized throughout the process, but definitely solidified once we saw what it was able to do.
I'm going to throw in that we are sending out the recording of this probably Monday or so. I'll make sure the link to the GitHub repository is in that email, and I'll see if I can pull the chat and get a version of the chat to
Because
post
the
or
chat isn't going to
include,
be
because the chat's good.
in the recording, unfortunately, unless we can figure that out. There's a lively discussion which we might get to, but I wanted to go back to Ella Thompson's questions about authority lookups. Do you find that the LLM is better at vetting candidates from external authority sources than a reconciliation service like the ones available via OpenRefine?
Yeah, old school. Does old school work or not? Better or not, right?
I think that's a great test to do. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if Devon or Hannah or Karina, if you have.
I mean, I've used OpenRefine extensively. That was like the tool for me for a long time.
Still is for me.
But yeah, I honestly do think that is something to test more because
Huh.
you know, I am really impressed with the issue workflow, but I've not really looked. I'm actually, you know what, I will make this point. When we first did the scoring, I was curious to see if I would get any matches with what subject headings were originally. Like we were just, the prompt was just like, oh, can you create some? Can you have these matches? And I would get like, you know, 2 to 3 matches out of 5 essentially that were generated. So, which is more than I thought was going to happen. But yeah, I think we should do a test to more conclusively say yes or no. And also too, not just to say yes or no, but like it's most likely, as we found throughout this whole work, more of a question of what time should we use tool and what time should we use that tool. That seems to be more of the theme anyway.
Yeah, and that could be part of like a further workflow shift for us if we decide to go that route and we find that it works better. I will say identifying the gaps are just as important to me, considering that what we would want to do then is potentially create authority records via Wikidata. So also searching against Wikidata. I will also note that I am surprised that, you know, that we found that many matches because there's definitely this particular corpus of material contains a lot of people that I don't think are well represented in authoritative vocabularies. And so that's one reason I think it's helpful to generate those and know where those don't exist so that we can create them. And that is historically, we have done that work. I have done that work a lot with Josh, or Josh has done a lot of that work on our behalf by using OpenRefine and then Wikidata to create those records. So there's definitely a revisiting of that old workflow from when we did that a lot and testing against how we might update that now, knowing what we know.
So we only have a couple of minutes left. Do we have time for another question?
We do if there's more, yeah.
Okay, if I can kind of summarize, so there was a open question about, there's been a lot of discussion about one of the points you made about sensitive terms, harmful language, and the LLMs messing that up because they were trying to avoid it. And there was a question that I'm not sure I know enough about architecture to understand the response to, but maybe somebody could explain the experience you had with other patterns of the LLMs kind of systematically messing up when it was presented with like non-harmful language, but the other things you saw there. And there was a
Devon, you responded on the style thing.
Devon
so
responded about
we're gonna
style,
call it.
but again, I don't quite understand that. So yeah, I wonder if
Oh, yeah.
we could translate that for non-architects.
Yeah, I would love Katie to talk about that more because I know even in like just our normal work with our check-ins, like Katie will talk a lot about how making style determinations. I hear this so often. Making style determinations is not a thing we do anymore. And I'm like, okay, word, I will not use those terms.
It's not, and maybe not, and I way too strongly state that. I'm like thoroughly a modernist. It is still something that people do. It is still a valid way of describing things. It's also one of those things that I see misapplied all the time, and these are some good cases. They were also, I did definitely see in the like visual descriptions, sometimes they would describe buildings that had with columns that didn't have columns, or they were trying to ascribe it to a certain period or style of architecture that was just woefully wrong. And so Josh and I would like laugh and giggle at how ridiculously wrong they were, and just be like extra, I don't know, judgmental about the misapplication of terms. And I can't think of these particular examples, but there was one that described something as a Doric column, I think. And we were like, what are you talking about? This is like very much not even a classical anything. So it's that kind of thing that is humorous and all that, but could be misleading. And the problem with that is when students are first starting in architecture school and they may need to go find an example of a building with a Doric column. And if we had that metadata in our stuff in some way, and it would lead them to this picture of a, arts and crafts building, like something very much not the right thing. And that's the kind of thing I want to avoid. But you can see how that might play out across a variety of things in ways that could be problematic.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're done with questions. I think we're out of time, but Katie, Devon, Hannah, Karina, thank you all so much for taking the time to come and share what you've learned. This project is so thoughtful and so thorough, and I think there's so much to be learned from it, so I really, really appreciate it, and we're definitely following all the work you do.
Right. Yeah, if I can echo what Bruce said, this is a really, really impressive amount of experimentation by this team. Y'all are just doing amazing work here.
Well, thank you all for the invite. I was so honored to be asked, and I think our group is really happy. We've luckily been asked and honored to present this in a variety of ways, and so it keeps kind of changing shape and form, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it with this group, and y'all have asked really great questions and planted seeds for the next level of, experimentation we might do.
All right. Excellent. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.